Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's been an entire week since the election, but Decision Desk is finally making the call that Republicans will hold on to the U.S. House of Representatives. They currently are sitting at 219 congressional seats. Obviously, you need 218 for the majority there. It's looking like the final number is going to be about 221, somewhere around that. So definitely not a very comfortable majority by any means, but at the very least, we can say Donald Trump on paper will have a GOP trifecta going into his second term. And by the way, this completes what many of us have said is proof of a political mandate.
And so in the results of this election, we saw, of course, a vast majority of Americans placing their trust and confidence in President Trump, delivering a mandate and rejecting Kamala Harris's agenda of open borders, of censorship, of free speech, of freedom of religion, of crime in our communities, of continuing to wage stupid, costly, and unnecessary wars that are counterproductive to the interests of the American people, and instead embraced President Trump's vision and promise. So this is a clear mandate.
So folks, do us a big favor. If you're enjoying the content, be sure to hit that like button down below and subscribe if you are new. And why should you subscribe? Because it ensures we can keep bringing you these videos. We are aiming to hit 400K by Donald Trump's inauguration. Help us get there for free and resist the mainstream media by hitting that red button. And with that said, let's kind of, I hope, break down some of these results, because to be totally honest, I have very mixed feelings on this. On one hand, I'm glad, obviously, we held on to the House. And by the way, it should be a very key priority now for the second Trump administration. We do not have time to mess around. You got to get stuff done in the first 2 years, because it's very likely, just saying it right now, right, Democrats will probably at the very least win the House in the 2026 midterms. So you got to deliver. You got to get your agenda done now. The good part, though, is that despite the fact there are objectively still a lot of rhinos and neocons in the GOP House, Trump has much greater control over the party nowadays than he did in 2017 with the likes of Paul Ryan. And so when it comes to that, most Republican representatives nowadays, the very vocal ones like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, have all left office. So you definitely have some where if they were running their own independent presidential campaign, would probably sound a lot like the neocons. But people have to also ask themselves, do they want to blow up their political careers simply to oppose Trump? And I think what you've seen is many of the ones who had those intentions, like Amash, Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, people like that, have already now left office. And so while the House majority is going to be very slim, I am relatively confident that at the very least, because they don't believe it is politically expedient to be opposing Trump, that's good. Okay, and we should be able to get enough done. And it's also a similar story in the Senate. However, you do also have to ask the question, how does Donald Trump win the popular vote by such a crushing margin, sweep all 7 battleground states, and yet the margin for Republicans in the House is looking like it's literally going to be 1, 2, maybe 3 seats, but probably like 221. That's how much we're going to have, because that's just disgraceful. Right. And when you break down this map, you notice that there are a lot of close races that screwed us over. On election night, we were specifically looking at many of the key House races in New York. And you may remember in 2022, it was actually New York congressional districts that ended up giving the House to the Republicans. The problem is that ever since then, largely because of the George Santos scandal and what that did to local Republicans in the area, it's unfortunate but true, not as good of a turnout this time around. And I take a look at some of the close races like this, right? You have in New York's 19th district, Josh Riley, the Democrat, beats the Republican here by 5,000 votes. Like literally 5,000 votes, right? Some very close races you are seeing that are not really going the way we like. In California, Mike Garcia, a guy who has held on historically through a lot of the harder election cycles for Republicans, right? If I'm remembering correctly, he was elected in a light blue district in a special election back in 2020. He held on for the November election where obviously nationally Donald Trump was struggling in that. And even in 2022, where the red wave became the red mirage, still held on. But as we're currently looking at the 27th House District with 92% of the vote in, Mike Garcia is down by 7,000 votes. And it's possible, like he has a pathway, I guess, with the remaining vote, but not really looking super duper optimistic. And that's just a similar story you're seeing all around the country, right? In the North Carolina 1st District, here's another race where it's now been called for the Democrats. Don Davis here in this district only won by 5,000 votes. Okay, so what exactly is going on here? Well, I largely think in New York, again, that George Santos situation probably just kind of stained our party's image for the following election cycle. It is what it is. I don't know what you can do about it now, but also maybe you could make the argument that because the Republican House with Mike Johnson and the speaker drama was so dysfunctional for a very long time, that was always going to drag us down. So here's to hoping maybe we can do something in the 2026 midterms. You know, if we manage to actually turn out the Trump voters and the mandate is going very well, then you could see us actually be competent and expand our majority in the House. But at the same time, we know usually there is a backlash against the incumbent party in the midterm elections. But if we are highly competent and effective at governing, maybe in the first 2 years of Trump's term on a federal level, that you could see a situation where that changes. Again, I don't really think our chances are necessarily super duper strong, but hey, at the very least, it is possible. I look at, for instance, the Senate, and I see a very similar situation where obviously Republicans have taken control of the U.S. Senate. That was virtually an inevitability because the map was so favorable to us. But currently, as it stands, the New York Times has been very slow with calling these races, by the way. But Pennsylvania has been called for Dave McCormick. Arizona has been called for Ruben Gallego. So it's looking like the final split there is going to be 53 to 47, which by no means at all is a bad margin to have in the U.S. Senate. But it's still, honestly, to me, and again, I'm not trying to water down Trump's victory, but this is a greater point about the down ballot problems that the Republican Party still has, and arguably makes it much more impressive that Trump overcame the issues of the GOP for himself in the presidential election. Because you look at a race like Wisconsin, for instance, where Eric Hovde, who, by the way, ran a very good campaign, I think he was just underfunded, under-resourced. He was leading most of the night. At 3 a.m., a bunch of new ballots get counted, we'll say, in Milwaukee area. And in the end, Tammy Baldwin very narrowly holds on. In Michigan, Democrat Alyssa Slotkin beats Mike Rogers by literally half a percentage point. And then, of course, we have the Arizona Senate race where Kari Lake for a very long time seemed completely dead in the water. And then on election night, was doing very well, looking like it was going to come very close, but most major outlets now have called that race very narrowly for Ruben Gallego. And it's just disappointing because when you add this all up, you have Hovde, you have Michigan with Rogers, you would have had 55 Senate seats, and aggressively, even if we could get Kari Lake in there, that would have been 56. I think the maximum ceiling was as high as maybe 57, considering if we actually had resources behind Sam Brown in Nevada and he had any shot at being able to run a political campaign, you might have been looking at 57 Senate seats. What is to blame for all of this? Well, there's a number of different issues. I think, first of all, the GOP structurally, we just have this issue where a lot of voters who like Trump don't actually like the Republican Party, which is a narrative that would certainly seem counterintuitive to the people in DC who consistently think, right, Donald Trump is an electoral liability. No one likes him. If we just got some like smooth spoken, like softcore Republicans, we do better. Look at the Senate map, look at the House. That's actually not true. There's a lot of people who, again, like Trump, don't really like the Republicans, won't turn out, or will ticket split, all these other things. That's number one. But also number two, when you look specifically at how close some of these races were, a lot of the blame here goes on Mitch McConnell, because he obviously will not be the Senate majority leader this time around, largely was pushed out by Donald Trump and a lot of the people in MAGA, which is good. Right? Mitch McConnell did a terrible job running the Senate. He's essentially a saboteur and just an overall really bad look for our party. Like, can we get someone who's a little younger and not as senile as Biden up there, just saying? But the issue is, on his way out, leading the Senate minority, he basically sabotaged, much like Biden sabotaged Kamala, was undermining the resource distribution of the Senate GOP. For instance, this guy with the NRSC, right, the National Republican Senate Committee, whatever, gave a ton of money for some strange reason to Larry Hogan, who first of all is a rhino and secondly had no actual shot of winning the election in Maryland. And look how that went, right? Democrat beats Larry Hogan here 53-44. Meanwhile, we give virtually no resources to Sam Brown in Nevada. That race was within 2. Carrie Lake, who I know a lot of people say was not a very strong candidate, and I do like Carrie Lake on a personal level, but I would tend to agree maybe she's not the overall best person you could be running in Arizona, and we kind of seen that happen twice now, right? But with that said, even all of her liabilities and favorability aside, that race in the end, when it came down to it, was still extremely close. And you have to think, if Carrie Lake maybe got a little bit of extra resources from Mitch McConnell, you would have been able to push her over the finish line. Again, Mitch McConnell, if you weren't wasting so much stupid money on this Maryland Senate race, you would have been able to do something, okay? So it is what it is. Like, in the end, the neocons, although this election was the final case, like, they're out, they're done in politics. They're never coming back, especially the way Trump swept the map by a bigger margin than any of the neocons ever did, including Bush too, right? But at the same time, unfortunately, it just tells you so much about them that Mitch McConnell, instead of trying to do good for his party and actually cement his legacy as a decent Republican leader, at least, like he never was, but at least he can make that argument. Nope, just screws it up on the way out. I'm sure he'll still run around and say, oh, but Republicans won the Senate, so I did a good job. Yeah, clearly not. It is what it is, though, guys. We'll worry about this later, but I think long-term, looking forward, we have to figure out how to get GOP candidates who are not named Trump to win in these swing states, okay? Part of that's resource distribution. Part of that is maybe the type of candidates we run. I don't know. You know, it's just a lot of issues. We'll figure it out. But for now, guys, I am happy that